Israeli tactics are called into question in a new report by the Washington Post, as well as a statement by Democratic lawmakers. It's more pushback than we've seen in quite a while. What's going on, everyone? Let's take a look at some updates as it relates to the ongoing war between Israel and Hamas. I'm recording this at 8 a.m. Central on Saturday, December 23rd, 2023. For updated casualty information, you can find links in the description below to information published by the Gaza Health Ministry and Al Jazeera, as well as the official sources put out by the IDF. Starting with operations on the ground, looking at a map here from War Mapper on Twitter. They updated their graphic in the last 24 hours. The blue that you see on this map are ongoing Israeli operations. So Israel has made some statements about operational control or the destruction of Hamas organizations in some of these areas, but as expected, we haven't heard anything about a single portion in Gaza yet being fully cleared. And without the tunnel networks there, much of this area would be marked by now as secure, but when you add those in, the underground networks all across Gaza, it's a whole different ballgame. So we've already seen a few videos put out by Hamas and statements from the IDF where an area that Israel has already moved through, that in a different type of conflict might be considered clear and secure, and kinetic activity has kicked off there, days or even weeks after the initial Israeli forces moved through that area. So the tunnels all across Gaza are a variable here that makes it very, very hard to put an estimate on how long it'll take until these clearance operations are complete. Then shifting to the south, where the focus is around Khan Yunis, a lot of Hamas reports in the last few days have been talking about their attacks against Israeli forces in this area more than we're hearing about up north. There's still fighting going on in both areas, but as of now, it looks like the clearance of Khan Yunis will be just as challenging of an operation as what the IDF is dealing with up north around Gaza City. Additionally, Israel says that they have arrested more than 200 Hamas operatives in Gaza this week that have been taken in for questioning. This type of real-time intelligence gathering, when they are able to interrogate Hamas operatives that were fighting on the battlefield earlier that day, gather intelligence, that leads to very real-time targeting of other elements of the same terrorist cell, or potentially even moving up that ladder and targeting some of the more senior leaders in Hamas. Israel also released footage from one of their dogs that they sent down into one of the Hamas tunnels. They say the camera mounted on the dog's back revealed a tunnel network hundreds of meters long, including command and communication rooms, hideouts with dozens of meters of space, concrete bunkers, and water and electricity installations. We've already seen quite a few videos and pictures put out by the IDF showing their canine units operating both above and below ground. So a lot of these dogs, their primary purpose is going to be the detection of explosive devices, IEDs, booby traps, things like that. It seems like a new method here is strapping a camera on the backs of the dogs. Why not? Gather a little more intelligence as they're running around, especially when you throw them underground into these tunnels. They're able to uncover things without risking the life of an Israeli soldier. A few weeks ago, the most controversial story coming out of Gaza was when Israeli forces surrounded and subsequently cleared the Shifa Hospital. I'll play a clip here of the animation that Israel put out ahead of that operation, suggesting that the hospital sat atop a significant Hamas command and control network, communications rooms, living quarters down below ground, weapons storage, and so on and so forth, all underneath the largest hospital in Gaza. They did put out information immediately after the clearance showing tunnels in and around the Shifa complex. They showed hostages being moved into the hospital. They showed Israeli military vehicles being moved to the hospital on October 7th. There have been weapons uncovered on hospital grounds, but a new article put out by the Washington Post says not enough. We expected to see a lot more at this point, given that Israel moved into a hospital complex in the middle of a war zone. The Washington Post says the evidence presented by the Israeli government falls short of showing that Hamas had been using the hospital as a command and control center, according to a Washington Post analysis of open source visuals, satellite imagery, and all of the publicly released IDF materials. That raises critical questions, legal and humanitarian experts say, about whether the civilian harm caused by Israel's military operations against the hospital, encircling, besieging, and ultimately raiding the facility and the tunnel underneath it, were proportionate to the assessed threat. That is the biggest piece here. In the immediate aftermath of this operation, as footage was coming out showing the tunnels on the hospital grounds, people were still denying that those tunnels existed. They're there. There are tunnels in and around the hospital complex. What this piece from the Washington Post gets at is, does what has been uncovered so far justify, was it a proportional response to the clearance, if you will, of the hospital complex? They say the rooms connected to the tunnel network discovered by IDF troops showed no immediate evidence of military use by Hamas. None of the 5 hospital buildings identified by IDF spokesperson Hagari appeared to be connected to the tunnel network, and there is no evidence that the tunnels could be accessed from inside of hospital wards. Again, all of this kind of wrapped up a few weeks ago. Now it takes time to get down into these tunnel networks and clear them and make sure there's no booby traps and document what you're finding, right? It's not an easy thing. The expectation that Israel would walk across a tunnel entrance and in the next 30 minutes there'd be a ton of footage out there to the world, that was unrealistic. But now it's been weeks, and as the Washington Post calls out here, we expected to see more at this point. In fact, they have a member of Congress speaking anonymously. There's not a lot of things members of Congress speak anonymously on, but I think this speaks to the sensitivity of how people don't really want to push back against some of this. He said, quote, "Before I was convinced that Al-Shifa was where these operations were taking place, but now I think there has to be a new level of demonstration. They should have more proof at this point," end quote. And I think that's fair. Again, based off of what Israel said before the operation, what we've seen so far is not really anywhere near the same degree of the underground complex. And then kind of wrapping up here, they say, while the underground tunnel uncovered by Israeli forces after the raid does point to a possible militant presence underneath the hospital at some point, it does not prove that a command node was operating there during the war. Again, the proportionality is the major question here. The tunnels exist. There were weapons on hospital premises. We have videos showing that Hamas was at least in and around the hospital on October 7th, moving hostages in, moving military vehicles into the courtyard. That's all there. It's the proportionality. Does that warrant, the full clearance of the hospital in a time of war? Then after a few days of delays, the UN Security Council voted on another resolution around the Israel-Hamas war. The Security Council voted yesterday to appoint a humanitarian reconstruction coordinator for the Gaza Strip and demanded that Israel and Hamas allow the safe delivery of humanitarian aid into the Palestinian civilians. So overall, 13 countries voted in favor of this resolution. Nobody voted against. The U.S. and Russia abstained. Some statements from some of the key players here. U.S. Ambassador Thomas Greenfield said that international humanitarian law applies not only to Israel, but also to Hamas, a terror group that instigated the conflict and wages war from inside homes, hospitals, and United Nations sites. She said she welcomed the call for the appointment of a senior UN official to expedite delivery of humanitarian aid, and said she was appalled that the council was once again unable to condemn Hamas's horrific terrorist attack on October 7th. Russia, who abstained, did not veto, and did not vote in favor, said that the United States exposed its true face to the world by blocking an extremely weak call for a cessation of hostilities in Gaza. Today is a tragic moment for the Council, not one of triumph. Essentially, the Council is being asked to not get in the way while the United States goes around twisting arms in the region. So, good terms, the United States and Russia these days. Seems like anything we can argue over, we're going to argue over. Then Brett Miller of Israel, not on the Security Council, but just a comment from Israel I felt was warranted here. He said, just as the Council is committed to increasing aid, it should be committed to supporting Israel's mission to return the hostages, block the smuggling of arms to terrorists, and ensure that aid is not diverted to terrorists. Any resolution should hold Hamas accountable, as it is a genocidal terror organization and a direct threat to Israel, Gazans, and regional stability. Now, quick note on this, or really any UN resolution. For better or for worse, there's not a lot of teeth to these things. It tends to be a lot more of a way to view public sentiment, international sentiment, and how different countries are aligning behind different factions in a war or an issue more than anything else. It could lead to something, but, again, not a lot of teeth to the UN these days. Then here in the United States, 6 Democratic lawmakers sent a letter to President Biden this week saying, quote, "We are deeply concerned by Netanyahu's current military strategy in Gaza. The mounting civilian death toll and humanitarian crisis are unacceptable and not in line with American interests, nor do they advance the cause of security for our ally Israel. We also believe it jeopardizes efforts to destroy the terrorist organization Hamas and secure the release of all hostages." I got a lot of thoughts on this one. I'm glad they included that last part here because otherwise I feel like they'd be accused of being Hamas supporters, right? But they call Hamas a terrorist organization and say we got to do what we can to release all hostages. And this is not an effective way to destroy Hamas. They still list that as a primary objective here, right? Which is one of Israel's primary objectives. I have a little bit of a mixed feeling when the United States or anyone else tries to dictate to another country what is in their best security interest. I just think that's tough and not always a good place to be. It assumes that we know more than somebody else actually living through something. But they did list right in here what I think they should. They said this is not in line with American interests. That's their job as American lawmakers, right? They're looking at the war in Israel in line with American interests, and they're saying what we're seeing right now is not it. So the statement here was signed by 6 Democratic representatives, Jason Crow, Mickey Sherrill, Chrissy Houlihan, Seth Moulton, Abigail Spanberger, and Alyssa Slotkin, who are all members of the House Intelligence, Armed Services, or Foreign Affairs Committee. Also, each one of these members here were either former members of the military or intelligence community and did serve during the 20-plus year U.S. global war on terror. So they've got a little bit of a background to speak to this, right? They added, quote, "We know from military experience that you can't destroy a terror ideology with military force alone, and it can, in fact, make it worse," end quote. Now, I wanted to bring this up. I think it's notable because for international audience out there, these lawmakers are coming from the same party as our current U.S. President Biden. This same letter, if it was written by Republicans, would probably be viewed as a little bit partisan in nature and written off to a degree. But realistically, there's not a lot of daylight between the two political parties, the Republicans and the Democrats in the United States right now, in how they view Israel. Overall, just about all of our elected officials in Washington are pretty in lockstep with whatever Israel wants to do. So any degree of pushback against Israel or against their current policies and how they're waging this war, it's notable. Whether it's coming from any party, I think this one gets a little more credibility because it's coming from people inside the same party as President Biden. Now, my view here, getting into a little bit of a personal opinion, is the same as when viewing events in Ukraine, between Ukraine and Russia, and it's what is in the best interest of the United States. And I, as an American, that's how I look at this, and I think that's how our lawmakers should probably look at a lot of events. We got a lot of really great allies all around the world, but I don't think it's ever appropriate that our allies' interests should be placed above the interests of the American people, at least when we are viewing reactions to and how we support or don't support various actions around the world. So, that's one of the things I liked in this statement was they didn't just throw out blind criticism. They pulled it back and said, we're saying this because we don't believe what is happening right now is in the United States' best interest. But that's all I got for now. Of course, if interested in national security subjects, be sure to check out the sit reps I put out on Substack. Link is in the description below. Substack now also has ad-free, sponsor-free videos that go live about 1 hour before they're up on YouTube. And all annual plans are 20% off from now until December 31st. But thanks for watching. I'll see y'all next time.